We're okay? Okay, see some thumbs up. Thank you so much for bearing with us on the seating situation. We appreciate your patience and your grace with our situation. What a good problem to have. So many people want to learn about John Hafen and his wonderful art. My name is Allison Kinniger. I'm the head of exhibitions and programs at the Springville Museum of Art. I want to open this evening with a land acknowledgement. The Springville Museum of Art acknowledges that this exhibition is taking place on land that is sacred to the indigenous peoples of Utah. Tribes within Utah include the Ute, Paiute, Goshute, Shoshone, Navajo, and Hopi. And we honor them and their ancestors their physical presence. Thank you so much for joining us for this special event to celebrate our exhibition, Enduring Beauty, John Hafen and the Power of Art. And this is one of the first major retrospectives of John Hafen's work. We're just thrilled by how it's turned out and all the wonderful artwork we've been able to gather together into this museum. John Hafen is so special and integral to the Springville Museum of Art's origin story, and you'll hear a little bit more about that from our director, Emily Larson, later tonight. He believes so deeply that art has the power to uplift and elevate lives and communities, and he dedicated his life to this idea. And over the last century, it's become part of the Springville Museum of Art's roots. The museum's mission today is to strengthen communities through life-affirming art and experiences that foster beauty, contemplation, and connection really started with John Hafen's gift of mountain stream to the students of Springville. And so we are so thrilled to honor him and his legacy through this exhibition and this event tonight. I want to quickly thank some of our exhibition and program sponsors, Clyde Companies, Gail Miller and Kim Wilson, the Traditional Fine Arts Organization, Utah Arts and Museum, and Springville City, none of which we could do what we do without their generous support and kind, thoughtful donations. So thank them. Swanson and Swanson Jones for their wonderful book project. John Hafen. Painter and spurred this exhibition into existence. So we are so grateful for them and their work. We appreciate their dedication to Hafen and their partnership with the museum. They are such wonderful collaborators and also have really accomplished a wonderful thing with this book. Hopefully you'll all get to look at it. And if you want to purchase a copy, there's one available down in the museum gift shop. And there may be some signings later tonight if you can nail down for we have some wonderful speakers slated to present tonight, and we'll get to them pretty quickly. I just wanted to quickly introduce them to some short bios on each of them so that you know what wonderful scholars and art historians will be presenting tonight. We will start with Dr. John Andersen. Dr. Andersen earned his BA and MA degrees at BYU, his PhD from the University of Idaho. He taught as a professor of humanities at BYU, Idaho for 31 years, during which time he served as the chair of the Department of Humanities and Philosophy and was co-founder of the Humanities Travel Study Program, in which capacity he directed student travel study programs in Europe 23 times. He can truthfully say that he knows London better than he knows Salt Lake City. Dr. Andersen enjoys gardening, camping, photography, and traveling. Has visited more than 45 countries. He loves learning about and experiencing other cultures and has lived abroad for 15 years in New Zealand, Austria, Croatia, Serbia, and Spain. He and his wife Lori are the parents of 6 children and 21 grandchildren. Angela Swanson Jones is a graduate of Brigham Young University and holds an MA from the Portal Institute of Art, University of London. She serves as exhibition director of the International Art Renewal Center Salon. Angela has published articles with Fine Art Connoisseur and has now co-authored 3 books, including John Hafen, Utah's Poet Painter. Currently, she is writing a biography in catalog raisonné on the German painter. Dr. Vern Swanson studied at BYU and the University of Utah and received his doctorate at the Portal Institute of Art, University of London. He was the museum aide supervisor at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and director of the Springville Museum of Art for 32 years until his retirement in 2012. He is the co-author of John Hafen, Utah's poet painter, in addition to the author of several fine art publications. His other publications include 2 major books on Sir Lawrence Alma Tadema, 5 books on Russian and Soviet art, 6 books on Utah painting and sculpture, and 2 books on theology. David Andersen established David Andersen Fine Art in 1978, specializing in Utah painting and sculpture. He has always emphasized the importance of building a collection by focusing on the art that he loved. David has been heavily involved in consulting for various artists and art committees, including Governor's Mansion Foundation Board, Utah Arts Council Collection Committee, and the LDS Church Art Group. David Andersen Fine Art has praised a myriad of important collections throughout the country and has handled the estate of several notable historic Utah artists. David is a self-described art nerd. He has extensive knowledge of art history and specializes in Utah and Western art. He is honored to represent many of the best artists in Utah, both past and present. Emily Larson is the current director of the Springville Museum of Art and a statewide leader in championing local artists. A respected voice in Utah art and history, Emily holds degrees from Brigham Young University and the University of Utah, and has published and presented widely on the region's cultural heritage. In addition to her curatorial and leadership work, she serves on the boards of Utah Historical Society and Epicenter, and is a passionate advocate for the power of art to shape communities and inspire connection. We will now start our presentations, and we'll begin with
very happy to be with you this evening, be able to share some information about Paris, LDS Paris Art Mission. My ties to Springville are many. When I was young, my family lived in Springville for 4 years. I attended junior high and 2 years high school here. Then after I went to BYU and I was married, my wife and I when the first Mormon pioneers arrived in the Salt Lake Valley in July of 1847, they found a barren, inhospitable desert. Under the leadership of Brigham Young, the Mormon settlers began building homes, establishing farms, creating businesses and industries, founding schools, and in 1853, they laid the cornerstone of a great temple. We're not advancing here. Let's go to the next one. Thank you. As ever more pioneers continued to flow into Utah, communities were established throughout the territory. As these settlements began to thrive, began to turn their attention away from mere survival to fostering the arts, music, theater, and the visual arts. Though the demand for art was not yet such that an artist could make a living from art alone. The first generation of Utah artists were nearly all European immigrants from Denmark, Norway, and from Great Britain, who had received varying degrees of training in their homelands. They became teachers and mentors to the next generation of aspiring artists. Recognizing their limitation as instructors, they encouraged their most promising pupils to seek additional training in San Francisco, Boston, New York, or especially in Paris. And thus a small group of young Utah artists dreamed and schemed of finding a way to obtain advanced artistic training in the East or in Europe. A few of them succeeded. John Willard Clausen studied first at the National Academy of Design in New York City, and then at the most reputable private art school in Paris, the Julian Academy. Cyrus Dallin from here in Springville studied first in Boston and then at the Julian Academy before he was accepted to study at the French government-sponsored École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, the most prestigious art school in Europe at the time. James Taylor, or J.T. Harwood, from Lehigh, studied first in San Francisco, and then he too attended the Julian Academy and the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. Meanwhile, their friends back in Utah, with whom they corresponded, could only yearn for such an opportunity. By 1890, the exterior structure of the Salt Lake Temple was nearing completion. And Wilford Woodruff, the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, was pressing to have the interior of the temple completed in time for an April 6, 1893 dedication, which would be 40 years to the day from the start of construction. This was an opportune time for aspiring artists and friends, John Hafen of Springville and Loris Pratt, son of church apostle Orson Pratt, to approach church leaders with a proposal to have the church sponsor their art studies in Paris in exchange for their decorating the interior of the temple. In March 1890, Loris Pratt and John Hafen arranged a meeting with George Q. Cannon, first counselor to President Wilford Woodruff, to present a proposal. Their justification for asking for church assistance to further their art education was that no local artist was skilled enough to do painting worthy of the flagship temple of the church. In a follow-up letter to President Cannon, John Hafen wrote, "Who is there amongst all our people capable to do anything near justice to artwork that should be executed therein? I must confess that it is impossible for me to see any other or more consistent course to pursue in this matter than to give 2 or 3 young men who possess talent in this direction a chance to develop the same." Despite the church's dire financial circumstances at the time, church leaders evidently gave serious consideration to such a venture. After requesting more information about the costs involved and the personal financial resources of the artists, they agreed to provide support for 1 year of study for Loris Pratt, John Hafen, and John's close friend and partner in a photo tinting venture, John Fairbanks. On June 4th, 1890, these 3 attended a missionary training meeting in Salt Lake City and were afterwards set apart as missionaries with the specific assignment to study art in Paris so that they could decorate the Salt Lake Temple and possibly other future temples. On June 23rd, 1890, 3 weeks after their setting apart as missionaries, John Hafen, Loris Pratt, and John Fairbanks bade their families goodbye and departed for Paris. John Hafen, aged 34, left behind his wife, Thora Tweed Hafen, aged 31, just 3 days before their 11th wedding anniversary. At the time of Hafen's departure, they had 5 children ranging in age from 10 years to 6 months. Hafen's elderly mother also lived with his family. Loris Pratt, aged 34, left his wife of 10 years, Harriet Alzina Wheeler Pratt, aged 31, who was 6 months pregnant, and their 4 children, ages 6 to 1. John Fairbanks was 34 years old. He left his wife, Lily Hewish Fairbanks, who was 33, the day before their 13th wedding anniversary. They had 7 children between the ages of 12 and 1. The men traveled by train to New York, where they visited Niagara Falls and a few sites in New York City. On July 1st, 1890, Hafen, Pratt, and Fairbanks left New York City aboard the steamship SS Nevada and sailed for Liverpool, England, a trip of 11 days. In Liverpool, they each ordered a tailor-made suit for $12.50 each and did some sightseeing. On July 17th, they took a train to London, where they stayed a few more days and did as much sightseeing as they could. They departed from London at 8:30 a.m. on July 24th, 1890, and traveled by train to Dover, arriving at about noon. From Dover, they shipped across the English Channel to Calais, France. Of this rough voyage, Hafen wrote, "I was seasick all the way, nothing but puke, puke the whole distance, which lasted for 1 hour and 15 minutes. In this time, I thought my stockings would come up." In Calais, they managed to find the right train to Paris, arriving at 7:30 p.m. In Paris, the art missionaries connected with Cyrus Dallin, Hafen's friend from Springville, who had been studying in Paris for the last 2 years and was soon to return to Boston. For the next few days, Dallin helped them get settled and oriented them to the art museums and sites of Paris. On July 29th, only 4 days after the art missionaries arrived in Paris, Dallin invited Hafen to join him on a sketching excursion 20 miles north of Paris to the charming village of Auvers-sur-Oise, which had become a haven for artists. Vincent van Gogh had been living in Auvers for the last 2 months and had shot himself in a wheat field there just 2 days prior to Hafen and Dallin's arrival. He died in his room at the Raveau Inn at 1 a.m. on the very day that Dallin and Hafen arrived to do some sketching. In a village as small as Auvers, one might expect that they would have heard of the suicide of another artist, but Hafen made no mention of it in the letter he wrote to his wife shortly thereafter, and neither Hafen nor Dallin ever made mention of the event later, even after Van Gogh became famous. At any rate, Hafen became enamored with the village and later returned several times to paint, bringing his associates with him. The most sought-after art school in Paris was the École des Beaux-Arts, a state-run school which offered free tuition to male students under 30 who could pass its stringent entrance exam. Hafen, Pratt, and Fairbanks were all over the age of 30. They spoke no French and had no academic training in art, so they would not have been able to pass the exam anyway. They enrolled at the best private art school in Paris, the Académie Julian, which had an open enrollment policy, but whose professors were well-known painters who also taught at the state school. And thus it had a reputation for excellence on par with the École des Beaux-Arts. And because it attracted so many students from Great Britain and America, the Julian supplied a person to translate the professor's critiques of the students' work. Within a few days after their arrival in Paris, the art missionaries made contact with fellow Utah artist John Willard or Willie Clausen, who in the company of his wife and 2 daughters had arrived in Paris about 6 weeks earlier. Clausen became a classmate of Hafen, Pratt, and Fairbanks at the Académie Julian, and he and his family participated with them in church services at their new apartment. Clausen had initially come to Paris under private sponsorship, but his finances eventually were exhausted, and he too began to receive financial support from the church, with the expectation that he would also contribute work to the Salt Lake Temple. These 4 men were joined 2 months later by fellow Utahn Edwin Evans, and the following year by a young man from Payson, Hermann Haag. These two also initially arrived in Paris under private sponsorship, but when their funds dried up, they too eventually received financial support from the church and are thus generally included in the Paris Art Mission group. Edwin Evans was 30 years old and had been married 10 years. He had 6 children between the ages of 9 and 1. Hermann Haag was only 19 years old, single. In Paris, the art missionaries all joined the American Students Association, which provided American and British newspapers and magazines and a place to socialize with their countrymen. In this photo, I have circled the Utah artists, and they are from left to right: Edwin Evans, John Hafen, Willie Clausen, Loris Pratt, Hermann Haag, and John Fairbanks. There isn't enough time tonight to discuss in any detail the nature of the training the art missionaries received in Paris, nor the challenges that they and their families faced during their long separation. But you can imagine what it was like for these men, raised in the conservative and isolated environs of Utah, to leave their wives and children and travel 5,000 miles away to the culturally sophisticated yet morally liberal capital of France, with extremely limited funds, little previous training in art, no ability in French, no co-religionists for support, and only letters for communication, which took a month for a reply. Church leaders initially agreed to support the art missionaries for 1 year, but later evidently thought that a year may not be sufficient to develop the necessary skills, so they extended their support to 2 years. But John Hafen, probably out of concern for his family's financial circumstances, elected to return home after only 1 year and received permission from church headquarters to do so. Soon after his return, he was appointed the task of beginning to plan the layout of the temple murals and to obtain the necessary materials. Pratt, Fairbanks, and Evans stayed in Paris another year, but returned in the fall of 1892 so as to help complete the interior decoration of the Salt Lake Temple before its dedication on April 6, 1893. Clausen and Haag didn't return until the summer of 1893, too late to contribute to the temple murals. However, they compensated for their financial support from the church in other ways by painting official portraits of church leaders and producing works of religious instruction or for beautification of other church buildings. The lasting influence of the Paris Art Mission extends far beyond the inspiration the temple murals have been for generations of worshipers in the Salt Lake Temple. The art missionaries' legacy is evident in further work they did for the LDS Church, in their involvement in educating and inspiring the next generation of Utah artists, and in their broader efforts to promote art in Utah. Moreover, their lives have been an inspiration to their posterity up to the present day, and their works continue to inspire visitors to Utah's cultural institutions, which they help to foster, including this lovely museum here in Springville, whose collection began with a donation of works by John Hafen and his friend, Cyrus Dallin. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. That was great. We really appreciated your research and your dissertation. It was a valuable resource to my father and I when we were writing on John Hafen and the Paris Art Mission. So thank you. And it was an absolute joy writing this book with my father. We collaborated every day. We discussed, we debated, and it was great. And it was great getting to know John Hafen as an artist. You really get to know someone when you read all their letters, their private letters, and study their art. And he was a great man. John Hafen, well, I'll just wait for my slide for a second. He returned from Paris a changed artist. Gone was the archaic early hard pioneer style. And in Utah, he won awards and local newspapers widely recognized his talent, but sadly, that did not readily translate into an abundance of sales. Except for a brief 2-year period, which I'm going to go into more detail about, debt and poverty plagued Hafen for the rest of his life. So this is one of his post-Paris pictures from 1893 titled Spring Creek Swimming Hole and Pasture. Okay, in fact, John Hafen comes closest to the proverbial starving artist as any artist I know. On numerous occasions, Hafen found himself 1,000 miles from home with just a few cents in his pocket and debts due. And yet he continually pursued art, sustained by his wife, Tora. At his premature death at the age of 54, Hafen's white hair and weathered appearance made him appear decades older. In fact, newspapers often mistook him for a man in his 70s. And I believe this was a byproduct of the unrelenting financial stress he experienced. Sadly, Hafen was never able to convert his consummate talent into sustainable prosperity. And there are a number of reasons for this. First, Hafen came from very humble beginnings. Born in Switzerland in 1856, his parents were farmers who joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Switzerland. When they arrived to the Salt Lake Valley in 1863, they essentially had to start over. For 2 years, they fed themselves by gleaning wheat. His parents were never financially secure, and there was really no familial safety net for the artist. Secondly, John Hafen and his wife Tora had a large family themselves. Here's a picture of them with their 10 children. While Hafen delighted in his children, each additional child added further financial pressure for the family. And probably most detrimental was that Hafen just wasn't good with money. He spent everything he earned, he made bad investments, he overbuilt on his home, and he didn't have the ability to create multiple streams of income. In a 1908 letter, the famous photographer and dear friend of Hafen, C.R. Savage, took him to task for this. He begged Hafen to find some way to make money and not live so miserably, but Hafen couldn't seem to manage this sensible path. To be fair, Hafen did try. He had several jobs teaching art. He founded the Brigham Young Academy Art Department in 1892. Then in 1896, Hafen, Edwin Evans, and J.T. Harwood opened the Academy of Fine Arts in Salt Lake City. But they couldn't draw in enough students, and sadly, the academy was short-lived. He also briefly taught in Ogden Schools and the Weaver State Academy, but these paid poorly and kept him indoors when he longed to be outside, as we see in this painting, Harvest Time near Sugar House from 1897. Something that sustained him financially for years, but ultimately depleted him as an artist, were solar portraits. Now, most people don't know what solar portraits are, so I'm going to explain. This is a solar portrait by Hafen of Daniel H. Wells. Solar portraits were essentially photographic enlargements. They were produced by passing sunlight through a glass negative onto light-sensitive paper, and this would create a faint outline that Hafen would come in and enhance by hand with charcoal or crayon. And to the public, these appeared as highly detailed portraits, but Hafen knew the truth. They were mechanical and uninspiring, and worse, they zapped his creative energy for producing art. The more solar portraits he produced, the less painting he did. The art market in Utah was also immature. To second-generation pioneers, collecting fine art seemed impractical. Or as Governor Wells stated, a man always buys a cook stove before he does a picture. So for years, Hafen vigorously fought against this mindset of viewing art as an optional luxury. He viewed it as a powerful tool for elevating humanity and opening our eyes to a greater appreciation of God's creation. There were lots of attempts to promote exhibition and sale of art, and that led to the creation of the Society of Utah Artists in 1893 and the Utah Art Institute in 1899. And the papers were really helpful for these artists. They were always promoting them, trying to encourage people to collect local artistic talent. But unfortunately, sales were few and far between for Hafen. And he often took to bartering his art for groceries, products, and services. In early 1900, Hafen began to believe that he couldn't support his family in his home state and that he shouldn't hide his talent under a bushel. So he formulated a plan to establish a network of dealers and collectors outside the state. So he ventured to Seattle and the Bay Area of California to paint, exhibit, make connections. Sadly, the artist came back 5 months later, dejected and penniless, but with some wonderful creations like this Presidio Monterey, and the next one, which is Leona Heights, Oakland, California. And these were both produced on that trip in 1900. Fortunately, in the wake of this disastrous trip, he exhibited his painting, Quaking Aspens, at the Utah Art Institute show, and narrowly won the prize, the purchase prize of $300. This would have been a huge boon to the artist. Hafen, fortunately, had success winning cash prizes in the different territorial and state fair competitions, but this couldn't make a sustainable income for him. Around 1900, Hafen began petitioning his friend Heber J. Grant. He was then an LDS apostle for financial help to make payments on his home. But the financial maneuvering was exhausting to Hafen, and he wrote this in a 1900 letter. It is about as ridiculous as anything can be that I should be so cramped for means that I am continually hampered in my work. If only he didn't have to worry about money all the time, and he could work all day long on art. Well, fortunately, when the family was on the brink of destitution, relief came to them in the form of LDS church patronage. Hafen's obvious need, his deep testimony, and his genuine talent recommended him for the patronage, but it was a recommendation of his friends like Heber J. Grant and the artist George Taggart that made it happen. So beginning in 1901, the church granted Hafen a monthly salary of $100 in exchange for the artwork he produced. That year, he created 45 works of art. The arrangement worked out so well, the church again engaged the artist for another year, but with better terms. This time, he was to earn $200 a month, and he was allowed to sell his art and keep the difference between the selling price and the advanced amount. And with this additional incentive, Hafen produced over 100 of works of art that second year. The result of these 2 years of patronage was unmatched productivity and superior quality. He no longer had to paint quickies to buy a bag of groceries. Instead, he lavished himself on his canvases with the knowledge that his family had food on the table. And masterpieces ensued. We got to look at some of those. With his family taken care of, Hafen spent most of the summer of 1901 painting in the mountains at Brighton. And here's a cozy scene from his time there titled Brighton Campfire. He painted the high country, the wild mountain flowers, and the quaking aspens to his heart's content. He was in his element when he painted Big Cottonwood Canyon with its vivid profusion of grains. During his time there, he wrote, I was never out in the mountains when I felt so happy as I do this time, realizing that I'm getting something for it. Certainly, my favorite canvas from this period was his verdant tonalist canvas, Forest Solitude. The press praised this for its breathless silence. In the 1902 Utah Art Institute exhibition, this painting was awarded the Medal of Honor for the best work of art in the exhibition. Unfortunately, this didn't include a cash prize. After being home for a few months from Brighton, Hafen was set apart as an artistic missionary in January of 1902, and he was blessed to have a successful trip in the eastern United States. So Hafen went to the eastern United States for 4 reasons. First, he was trying to find representation in galleries. Next, he wanted to enter exhibitions and become well known. Third, he would visit as many artists and exhibitions and museums as he could to broaden his artistic ethos. And then finally, paint as many paintings as he could. He appreciated the sacrifice of the church on his behalf, and he worked hard to be prolific. He first went to Chicago, where he happened upon the call of entries for the exhibition of the Art Institute of Chicago. So he quickly got 2 paintings framed, and both were accepted into this exhibition. The study of grapes here attracted the attention of the art critic, Henry Charles Payne, who wrote that while the subject was unpretentious, the value of the artwork was in the painter's exercise of the highest artistic gift. Then the artist continued on to New York, New Jersey, Maine, and Boston. And in Boston, he of course visited Cyrus Dallin, his friend and fellow Springvillian. Dallin helped him make connections with art galleries, and everywhere he went, Hafen tried to make those connections, trying to build that network, and he was able to place a number of works of art in various galleries. He also painted some masterful works, including Sunset Through the Forest, New Jersey, Spreading Oak, and Valley Landscape. And here we see Hafen experimenting to an even greater degree with toneless painting. From this point forward, Hafen alternated between 2 major modes of expression: the painterly touch of color impressionism and the more subtle glazes of tonalism. In total, Hafen spent about 6 months in the East before returning home to his family. Somewhere along the way, he let it slip about his quiet arrangement with the church. And soon after, as we know, gossip spreads, newspapers across the country were reporting about it with varying degrees of accuracy. Here we have an example of one such article from the Boston Sunday Globe. And its title says, "Artist Backed by Church." But there are many articles across the country about him. And the story had a long life. The narrative was reprinted until the end of 1903. And when the Salt Lake Tribune ran its own version of this article, riddled with errors, the church-owned Deseret Evening News stepped in to correct the inaccuracies and alleviate some of the chagrin caused by the article among the Utah art community. The church probably didn't want to make a habit of supporting artists with allowances, and such unwanted publicity might have dissuaded them from another year of patronage to Hafen. But I don't know, it's a guess. Back in Utah, Hafen had a productive summer of painting in 1902. Finally home from his travels, he took time to appreciate the charms of home and the quintessential Utah landscape, including this sun-infused Bluffdale landscape from 1902. That summer, he also painted his most iconic work, Girl with Hollyhocks. He was inspired to paint this painting because of the view he had from his studio window. Just before going to church one morning, he looked out and he saw his beautiful daughter among the hollyhocks. And this is perhaps Hafen's most impressionist painting, painted wet into wet with a loaded brush saturated with hues of all kinds. It's rich in pigmentation and alive and joyful in light and color. In the winter, Hafen painted this noteworthy, but he only seldom painted snow, unfortunately, but snow-covered woods, the winter of 1902. The artwork from these years were decidedly some of his best. However, Hafen didn't sell a single picture for the entirety of the 2-year contract period, even in the Eastern galleries. However, he still expressed gratitude to the church who had given him a chance to raise his art to, quote, a higher plane and open a new epoch in my art career. In the end, Hafen requested an additional $1,000 for the entire collection of 150 works from these years, and the church very generously acquiesced. So now the Church History Museum still owns really a very large collection of some 69 works. Sadly, Hafen never did as well financially as he did in those 2 years. No longer on the subsidy of the church, Hafen quickly found his finances in disastrous circumstances. In 1902, he began building a grandiose Swiss chalet-style home here in Springville. It was meant to be a center of art. Unfortunately, he could not afford it. When the money soon ran out, he began trading art for cement and contractor services and making debt everywhere. In 1908, Hafen tried again to find success outside the state by traveling to the east, and he eventually settled in Indiana, where he painted with the noted Brown County artists. This is a work of art from that period. It's titled A Landmark by the Roadside, Brown County, painted in 1909. Then, just as he was starting to have a small measure of success, he died of pneumonia at the age of 54. Just 2 weeks after his family joined him in Indianapolis. Despite the hardships, great generosity was shown to John Hafen and his family from his many friends and the church. The LDS Church really helped make Hafen the artist he was. Sadly, he never experienced the material comfort, or he only briefly experienced the material comfort that an artist of his talent might have expected. I wish there had been a few more years of patronage, but nevertheless, as Mahan Young noted after his death, John Hafen was a sunny, optimistic spirit. Among the painters of Utah, John Hafen was most generally loved as a friend and respected as an artist. Finally, Alice Merle Horn was perceptive when she said this about John Hafen. John Hafen has laid all upon the altar of sacrifice for art's sake. Thank you.
We're just going to take a quick 10-minute break so we can all stretch our legs a little, and then we'll be back, and Vern will begin. Welcome back, and we will now hear from Dr. Vern Swanson.
Oh, this is your talk. Do you mind if I give it again? Okay. Before we start, let me just mention to you that there's going to be some confusion because my talk, I note that John Hafen was not an overt religious painting artist, and yet I have 20 slides of his religious art. So you might say, oh, what do you mean he's not a religious artist? Here they all are, and they are all there for the most part. There's about 10 I'm missing, but that's out of an oeuvre of about 900 works of art. So very small, less than 1/10 of 1% of his art is religiously oriented, but they all were on a personal level. So what I have to show you is you'll see the religious paintings every 30 seconds. It'll go to the next one. Okay, and that will be, but my talk will go in another direction. So my talk goes this direction, the slideshow goes in that direction. And I hope you like both. You'll probably like the slideshow better, I'm sure. Okay, go ahead, please. And the next one. Okay, John Hafen was a thoroughly Latter-day Saint artist in a philosophical and evangelical sense. Though he was not particularly a painter of overt Christian genre themes or content, he was a landscape painter in the vision of his own day, who searched for the universal and the eternal beauty of God's creation, underlying rustic nature. Taken all together, he was the clearest voice and of aesthetic conscience of Utah art. And artists should be judged by their best work, and Hafen's was equal to the best of Utah artists and fares well nationally. A gentle and congenial soul, Hafen was certainly the most beloved artist of Utah's second generation. That'd be from the 1885 to the 1920s. Okay, John Hafen's dedication to the cause of art caused the family no end of suffering, but it also inspired those artists of his and future generations. What would Utah art be without the father figure and this dogged person, with his dogged personality? No 19th century or early 20th century artist, born artist, would have more religious or spiritual impression on the Utah aesthetic than C.C.A. Christensen, Dan Wegland, John Hafen, Minerva Teichert, and Arnold Freeberg in painting, and Albert T. Fairbanks in sculpture. Hafen, unlike the others, painted very few genre pieces, religious genre pieces per se. But this was the first and foremost, his was the first and foremost vocal advocate for consecrating one's art to nature and nature's God. In essence, he sought to see the maker's mark in all things, as Dale Fletcher would often say. The heralded marriage of John and his spiritual equal, Tora Tweedy Hafen, in June of 1879, marked the beginning of the artist's spiritual quest in fine art. Both possessed fervent testimonies of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Their children would be raised in a charged atmosphere of familial love, art, and gospel principles. Torah was a firm foundation upon which Hafen built his art career. Without her determination to see him succeed as a painter, he probably would have become a talented amateur rather than one of the pillars of Utah art history. By all accounts, their marriage was famously successful, even though poverty vexed them every year of their happy 31-year marriage together. The artist's son, Joseph Hafen, underscored this situation. There is one principle that, quote, there is one principle that impressed upon my mind indelibly. As John Hafen, my father, and Torah, my mother, were one, both were one with the Lord. They never started a day nor made a decision during the day without consulting their Father in heaven. They lived very near him, and Father kept the door open for the Holy Ghost to be his constant companion. I quote from a letter written on the 11th of December, 1890, while Father was in Paris studying at the Académie Julian. Quote, I earnestly want to become an honor to the people of God and useful in my sphere and calling. My ambition and desire is to be instrumental in exalting the beautiful art, the Beaux-Arts, to a high position among the people of God, so that the world may know what power there is in the gospel. John Hafen was a landscape painter who was considered by many to be a religious painter. We do not normally equate straight landscape painting with religious art unless there's an insertion of some religious theme or element within it. In the morning of true landscape painting in 17th century Holland, as the landscape got bigger and the religious genre narrative got smaller, we can see pure landscapes in some of the work of Phillips Koenig, and Jacob van Rysdale. But now Hafen was painting pure landscapes without any hint of religious subjects, not even in their titles. While John Hafen did not paint annunciations, nativities, triumphal entries, or crucifixions, he dedicated himself to make his art religious by covenant, if not by content. He made a covenant with God that he would dedicate his art to the Lord and to the betterment of mankind if God would open the way for him to provide for his family. In this covenant, it is this covenant I wish to explore tonight. In sacred art, there can never be the same give and take that we see between the artist and society in secular art. Some dramatic landscapes have clouds with rays of sunlight shooting through the earth, eliciting a sense of religious epiphany. Or sunsets often evoke a spiritual mood of peace and grace. But such works of art constitute a religious genre. Excuse me. I believe this is for somebody. Yes. Okay. Religious genre when their subject is so abstract and the interpretation so subjective. It is instructive to compare our artists with the California eucalyptus school painter William Wendt. Our museum owns a beautiful William Wendt painting, so you can see that. Is it on exhibition? The William Wendt? No. Okay. William Wendt saw the face of God in all things and sought to express him on his canvases. A Swedenborgian, Wendt believed, like Hafen, the concept that nature was a manifestation of God. Wendt was what we may call a passage moraliste, a moralizing landscape painter, artist. In fact, Wendt was the subject of a definitive book on the subject, saying such things as 3 forking branches in a tree represented the Trinity. And a mother tree would relate to the Virgin Mary. And so on and on. Okay, on the face of it, this seems absurd. Why do the branches not represent maybe the 3 wise men? And the mother tree represent Eve, the mother of all living, right? While Wendt believed that such a language was inherent within the natural world, we might think otherwise. John Hafen, while applauding Wendt's righteous quest in an exhibition he saw in March of 1910 in Indianapolis, would probably say that being so specific would be arbitrary, was an arbitrary designation. Hafen, being something of a passage moraliste himself, also imputed religious and spiritual definitions to his work, but more holistically. Though we could suppose that many critics might say to Hafen, don't go the way that William went. Okay, anyway, so Hafen was a religious moralist, to be sure, but his paintings came out more as sonnets rather than songs. What Hafen was a humble religious man, ready to say that his paintings were merely the representation of God's creation reflected in the truth of nature. However, there's a problem between this philosophy and faith. It was caused by this conflict. The rural nature that Hafen was portraying in his paintings was that of a tarnished, fallen, celestial, mortal world, not the resplendent beauty of the upper kingdoms. The nature of God found in the broken symmetry of this world was only a token of the future, more glorious realms. The artist sought to seriously paint both the promise and the truth of our present reality. He felt that each evocation on canvas was at least a beauty spot in the homes of Zion. The artist would attempt to condense natural beauty in paint until the viewer could more clearly see the handiwork of God all about us. Hafen saw God reflected in nature and therefore was not insistent that narrative images from the scriptures or church history must necessarily be represented. Even though he toyed with this idea once when he was illustrating the hymn, "Oh My Father," Hafen may be credited, but then he pulled back when they were heavily criticized. As far as I know, Hafen may be credited with painting the first image of our Mother in Heaven, even though the image looked a lot like his wife, Torah. You get that? Okay. Hafen would have heavily agreed with the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, who wrote, "The aim of art is not to represent not the outward appearance of things, but their inward significance." As mentioned above, Hafen was a kindred spirit with Ralph Waldo Emerson in the aesthetic sense. Late in life, he wrote a letter to Torah, which told us as much. Quote, "The book of essays by Emerson is a strong backing to my ideas. Not only to my ideas, but to my work as well, and to the effectual influence of the greatness of the experience of the kind of life that we have led." Emerson, through sheer greatness of character and intellectuality, has been able in his life's work to see further into things and nearer to divine truths than he was possibly aware himself. It is grand to contemplate, and it suggests that we are recipients of the gospel blessings, have no business to be anything other than the greatest of the great. Like the two biblical artists called of God, Aholiab and Bezalel from the book of Exodus, whose artwork was dedicated to God, John Hafen dedicated each work to God and the service of the gospel, though he seems to be unaware of these Old Testament passages. He intuitively felt that he too was wise-hearted and called of God. According to Joseph Hafen, who said, "My father never started a painting without asking God for inspiration and guidance. The same as the servants of God do when they commence a sermon from the pulpit. Each picture that he painted is a sermon, and the Spirit is felt by all who gaze upon it. John Hafen's contribution to Utah art was ultimately his passion and his spiritual testimony and his consummate talent. Hafen was not a stupefied intellectual, but rather an inquisitive painter with a message. Yet he was not indifferent to the discussions on artistic technique, art history, the market, philosophy, and aesthetics. He loved to talk about all those things. He did not believe art was just an aesthetically ethereal question, but rather was more purposeful. Hafen wasn't as interested in exactness or precision as he was in the broad truth of nature as rendered more poetically, as a bird sings, as they said about Monet. He was more concerned with the sensory interaction with nature's beauty and intimacies than a snapshot view of its actualities. He was after the elusive interplay of light and color with shade and shadow. As Paul Cézanne reportedly said, painting from nature is not in copying the object, but in realizing her sensations. This is akin to what an artist once said about Hafen's art. Quote, "They just grow on one. You gaze, as you gaze, the mist rises. They seem to awaken and to breathe." This work had more of the smell of bugs and the taste of the mountains and the fields than in their didactic representations. Before Hafen could fully pursue his such aims, he died of pneumonia at the young age of 54. His dream of a people refined by art and instructed by grand themes was fulfilled a half a century later with the Mormon art and belief movement. Ripples of this movement continued growing into successive waves. John Hafen was one of half a dozen artists of his day who valiantly influenced this future victory. Utah is one of the most vibrant areas in the world for religious and spiritual art. We rest now with the idea that John Hafen's personality and art was one of the first inklings and inspiration to this monumental groundswell. Thank you.
I'm very, very honored to be here tonight. My great-grandparents were from Springville. My mother was born in her great-grandmother's house. My grandmother remembered giving $1 to buy paintings from the April Salon from high school, which is why they started in here. But it's an honor to be here and to be included with the Swansons. Hafen's one of my heroes because of the structure and the love which he put into his paintings. And they're something that you have to live with to really understand and appreciate them. How many of you have ever owned a Hafen painting or have one in the house? Quite a few of you. And they make a difference in your life, don't they? They make you aware of things around you. Hafen grew up in a time in Utah where the most important thing that you could have in your house was a copy of an old master.
And you see him in the early paintings in the next room copying early paintings. And they didn't have color pictures that we have today. They had a black and white reproduction of a painting in Harper's or Scribner's magazine, and he did a pretty good job. And then he had to put color into it, and that made them different. And that's what people wanted. That was their aesthetic. In Europe, the most important thing that you could have was an old master, and then you could have a portrait of a famous person, the king. In Utah, they painted general authorities. Then you could have something that showed God in nature. And Hafen certainly, Vern just explained that, saw God in nature, in the things that he painted. And he was looking for it every day. One of the things you have to remember is that he never owned a car. Every painting that he painted from life was probably a half hour, maybe at the most an hour from where he slept. So many of them are up towards Hobble Creek Canyon or towards Mount Timpanogos. Or there's one he got on the train and he went up and you took the spur to Sanpete County and he got off in Indianola. Indianola's over here, and it was the model Indian farm that Brigham Young had them set up to teach the Indians to farm so that they could provide for themselves. And they didn't like the cabins that they built. If you go over there, you can still see the cabins. But they lived in their teepees. There's a painting over here of the teepees that the Indians were living in 1906. So those are the types of things that John Hafen was doing. He had a difficult time marketing his things. In my experience, it takes at least 5 years for somebody to develop a market with somebody. So he lived in Salt Lake for a while, and then he lived in Springville, and then he went to Ogden, and then he came back to Salt Lake, and then he went to Springville, and then he went to Seattle and California, and he went back east. And he never stayed in one place long enough to have people with John Hafen paintings in their house so that they were excited about it. And they told their friends and they said, there's something more here than meets the eye. And that's what great paintings are about. That's why they influence us in our lives and in our homes, is when we live with them. Economics are pretty simple. It's about supply and demand. And there was a point where John Hafen had more paintings than he had customers. And then all of a sudden, he had probably single best patron was Heber J. Grant, and then the Smarts who lived in Springville here. And they were excited about what he was doing. And they told their friends, and other people in town started to buy them. And the church had some paintings, and they found out that they were much better than what they'd paid for. And they wanted to go buy some more. And then he up and died on us. And the Smarts came out and supported him and bought some paintings. And the church came out and bought some paintings. And the family wanted to keep them. And over time, people have continued to see how those paintings influenced their lives. And we're grateful for the influence that John Hafen has had in my life, and I hope your life, and I hope you go in and stake a lot of time in that exhibit and look at the paintings and discover the things that John Hafen discovered. Vern's book's excellent. I've read every word, more than once, and Angela's, both of them. But I'm grateful for Springville Museum and the way that they have honored John Hafen through his life and continue to bless my life. Thank you.
Isn't this such a treat tonight to learn from all of these great people about Utah art? I have said probably more than once, probably to people like Alvin and Kylie, I'm not sure who knows more about Utah art, if it's Vern Swanson or Dave Erickson, but it's probably one of the two. So it was so fun to have you both here talking to Jeff. Your presentation was so great, and Angela, you are an incredible art historian, and this book is really incredible, and it's so fun to be honoring one of our founders. I also wanted, before I get into my remarks, which I'm going to try and be quick so that we can bring all the panelists up for some Q&A. But I want to thank some of our lenders who are here in the museum today too. The show that we have in the other room, which if you haven't seen, you really do need to go look and see all these Hafen paintings in person. It has about half of the works are from our permanent collection. And then we borrowed works from over a dozen private and public collections, including the Church History Museum, and Laura's house here. Thank you for your support, and from many private collections, including the collection of Brett and Melissa Brown. So we're so grateful for all the people who loaned work. And then one more housekeeping item, which is Jacqueline told me that it would be fun to do this because we have so many of the descendants of John Hafen here in the audience. If you are a descendant of John Hafen, will you stand up? We are so grateful to your legacy and that you're here celebrating your ancestor night. And what an incredible ancestor he is. And I'm going to speak a little bit about John Hafen and the Springville Art Movement, which is one of the reasons we are known, maybe the main reason we are known as Utah's art city here in Springville. And this is my very favorite mid-century billboard that welcomes people to Springville as art city. But the Springville Art Movement, if you ask the resident expert, Dr. Vern G. Swanson, when the Springville Art Movement started, I think he will start with, and I'm gonna, yeah, maybe I'll be like, awesome, with a man named Philo Dibble, who in the 1850s came to Springville as a settler, took his cane of the martyrdom with Joseph Smith's hair. This is, Vern, maybe I'll ask you on the hot mic. Is there any written documentation of this?
Well, the cane is here. It's right now. The cane, martyrdom, Philo Dibble's cane, is in the Church Museum of Art.
So the cane is there, and I think this story is true, but it's also part folklore in a way. But he comes to Springville in the 1850s, takes his cane of the martyrdom, sticks it right down on the corner, right here on First East and 400 South, and says there will be a gallery here someday. So it's really Springville's own "this is the place" moment, and that really started though this idea that there should be art in an art gallery. Something came of that, and around the turn of the century, there was a group of community members who were so inspired by these two artists with roots to Springville. Cyrus Dallin, one of America's great sculptors at the time, born in Springville, had moved to Boston, like we've heard in some of the other presentations, and become a nationally and internationally known monument sculptor. And then John Hafen, our very own painter, one of the art missionaries. And they convinced these two artists to give a work of art to the school children. And it really, really ties in to what Vern just talked about and this philosophy that Hafen had about the belief that art could make the community better, and that by giving children access to original works of art, you would make the whole, I mean, I say the whole world better, but it starts with this local community, their education better. They would be better citizens, better community members, and it would uplift them in really important ways. And so this whole community started to rally around this idea that the students should have access to original works of art. And so in 1903, Cyrus Dallin gave his work, Paul Revere, a maquette plaster study of the work that that eventually was reproduced on the Freedom Trail in Boston. And you can see that it's right through here, right before you get to the Hafen show if you'd like to see it. And John Hafen gave a painting, Mountain Stream. And this began the nucleus of the Springville Museum of Art collection. And I'm gonna have to move from the podium because I gotta keep this outside from this slide. Sorry, Kylie. But this is the letter from the Springville Public Schools in 1903 thanking artist John Hafen for his gift. And they write, "We are conscious that beauty is all around us and nothing is this more private than our natural surroundings. Yet many of us have eyes that," are not hints. Are not hints, are great identities to one who can help to give us the seeing eye, which is Hafen, helping them to see this God's nature's beauty around them. The artist not only discovers for us much that we ourselves cannot see, but all that is best in the individuality of his work. And as we stand admiring the production of his brush in all the nothingness of this thought, expressed in every part of the painting, your gift, artist Hafen, has two values, one a monetary, the other a virtue. The monetary you have sacrificed, but the virtue's reward you will receive, carried by the inspiration of your gifts to the child, which will remain a beautiful picture on memory's wall. And so that philosophy of how important this art was for the students of Springville influenced a whole movement. And this Earl Borg, this is a quote that I got from your books. Thank you, Angela and Vern, for including this. In 1930, kind of was thinking about this Springville art movement that started at the turn of the century that was really propelled by John Hafen. He remembered the first oil painting was received, the gift of the late John Hafen, the artist who kept burning the kindly light of hope for art appreciation in the young people. He is the gentle but powerful spirit the community holds most dear. Mr. Hafen strengthened and invigorated the movement by presenting other canvases at various times and selling one to the school occasionally at a monetary value so low that the picture was almost a gift. And that first gift started in 1903, but they kept wanting to do more. And I do encourage you to read what Angela and Vern are written about in the book, because they go through all the kind of ups and downs and the different community members who are trying to come together to really make this Springville art movement a real movement. And in 1907, because of Hafen's experience at the Chicago Art Institute and with the Utah Art Institute, they start the Springville Art Institute. They host a big show, and Hafen is donating another work of art to the students, and they have a big exhibition at the high school, which, if you don't know, was where the parking lot is now, was the old historic high school. And in that event, the governor came, all these dignitaries came, and it was really probably one of the first times Springville was known as Art City. And there's this great newspaper article that I'm going to quote from too, because I think it really sums up what the Springville art movement was about and what Hafen did. So it writes, and we'll keep that on. Thanks. If Springville is not Utah's cradle of art, it comes pretty nearly being so. From the boyhood days of Cyrus E. Dowland, the nationally famous sculptor, and John Hafen, that genuinely gifted and growingly appreciated artist, it has encouraged art and those who have chosen it as a profession as no other community of equal size in all the West. It apparently has made up its mind to hold that distinction. Certainly, it has taken a decided step in that direction, and one that might well be followed with profit by larger and richer cities in the state and Intermountain country. The ceremonies associated with the dedication of its art institute last night were in all respects a bright augury for the future. The establishment of the institute marks the triumph of years of longing and labor and gives to Springville the honor of having fostered and made possible the first institution of the kind ever launched in connection with the public schools, either in or out of Utah so far as known. Deep rooted in the hearts of its people is a love for art, literature, and science. In the propagation of this love, the public schools are the strongest factor, and they have been wisely and judiciously chosen to be the medium of dissemination.
The Deseret News desires to most heartily congratulate the good people of Springville in the permanent establishment of an art institute and hopes that it will produce many Dallins and Hafens whose models and paintings will become the pride of all our people. And Vern quoted from this and showed this same quote in his presentation, but I think even more than the gifts that Hafen gave at the turn of the century, at the very beginning of this Springville Art Movement, one of the things that is potentially even more important was this philosophy, this idea that he planted in the hearts of the people of Springville, that art is as important as anything else, and that as conducing to our happiness as anything we term necessities. Life is incomplete without art. And one person, one young woman who was around when Hafen was doing all this, really caught on to this philosophy. And her name was Maybe Huntington. And she was a protege of Hafen. She believed so fully in these same ideas that Hafen believed in. And in the 1920s, or maybe even a little bit before that, but for sure by the 1920s, she becomes the English chief of Springville High School. And under her work, that really, the Springville Art Movement continued. She took on John Hafen's legacy and continued it as they started the Spring Salon, as they continued to collect works of art, and as this building was built as a testament to art in 1937 in the middle of the Great Depression. And it kind of, I think I can see Vern tearing up a little bit. I'm like, it's so powerful, this idea that Hafen had about the power of art, and that he spread to these community members, that it did build this museum. And I think about his untimely death, especially as we've been doing this show and celebrating your book. And what would Hafen think if he was in this room with us today, of what those ideas came to be, and how many millions of people over this institution's history have been touched by the power of art. It's really quite incredible when we think about it. And here's a couple slides. This actually, I think Laura Howard sent me this picture from the church history file. So it was great of what the students continue to do inspired by John Hafen. And you can show the next slide too. This was their art gallery before the museum was built in the halls of the high school, just continuing this idea that art was so powerful. And it's something that still guides us today, where we do so much programming, we have great partnerships with the schools, and this idea that giving youth access to original works of art and really life-affirming experiences with art can make all the difference, is that idea still drives us today and makes a huge difference, and it really is all because of John Hafen. So I as the last slide, I just included again this gift that started it all, and it's kind of, Hafen's such a great example. Like, he had so much hardship, endured so much poverty, but believed so fully in his beliefs about art and about God and about beauty. And this one gift spawned a whole art museum that over 120 years has served millions and millions of people. And what are you doing in your life today that could spawn that same kind of effect? Because it is just one little thing. It adds and adds and builds and builds. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to invite our panelists, Jeff Andersen, Vern Swanson, Angela Swanson-Jones, and Dave Erickson. It's a little bit awkward because I'm going to ask you to bring your chairs up with you, but then we'll take some questions from the audience. Yes, does anyone have any questions for our esteemed panelists?
Suppose somebody wanted to buy a shop.
It's a question for you.
It depends on the painting. Springville Museum is very interested in buying a Hafen, which is better than the 40 that you have in the collection here. Church Museum is the same. So if you have a painting that is better than what they have, they're all there's lots of people anxious to buy that. If it's not as good, then the price comes down pretty fast. But $100,000 would not be an unreasonable amount for a very important painting.
That's the good.
Yes.
In the beginning of your book, you talk about your journey in writing the book. Which was a very nice one. Could you just review that again? I had a hard time wrapping my head around the length of time that this has been a desire of yours.
Yes, okay. There was a fellow, a student at BYU in 1969, 67 to 69, writing a dissertation on John Hafen. So I helped him. We went to Fred Hafen's home, to Rachel's home, to Joseph Hafen's home, and we interviewed people in '69. It's quite a long time ago. And then when I became the museum director, I remet them. And Rachel Hafen, a Bugler Stewart, she said, I'm writing a book on John Hafen. And she had 6 pages there. And I read it, and it was really bad. I said, I think I can do better than this. Would you like me to write for you? And she gave me every document, every letter that she had. She gave me everything I needed. Plus the museum had about 60 letters, which we since have given to the archives at BYU, so that their letters and our letters are now together. And so that was the start. That was 1980, and I began in 1981. The book is dedicated to Rachel Hafen, but also to Clayton Williams, who donated a large money for its publication. But Rachel entrusted me with the family legacy, and I hope we did, Andrew and I did a good job. If you want to see John Hafen today, Bruce, could you stand up? Bruce Smith is a great Utah artist, and he's the exact height of John Hafen. His eyes are the same color, the turn of his jaw, the white hair, he looks just like John Hafen's kid. I'm kind of. Anyway.
Other questions? Double mics.
I know that the John Hafen home was for sale a few years ago, and I kind of visualized, oh, it would have been a nice place to have art workshops or to be acquired by someone who had that appreciation. And I'm just wondering if that was ever even discussed. The home over here. By railroad tracks.
Yes, it was. Okay, the home, it had been for sale several times. The Crandalls owned it most of the time, that since Haven's death. But we were building a new wing to our museum here at exactly the time it came up for sale. So it was impossible for us to do that, this, that, and so we wanted to, but that would have been expensive to acquire, and then expensive to get it back in the somewhat original. It's actually very original. So, but, we tried.
Do you think we'll ever see a book on the art missionaries?
Yes.
Well, I I thought about that some years ago, but I never got around to doing it. If there's interest, maybe we all get to it.
Well, there is that.
This is very specific. When you were taking us around, when John Hafen, I think was first here, you showed us a picture. I remember trees on either side, there's a pathway or river thing, and there's a man sitting by the tree, and it's hard to see him, but he's the one that the movie, the pictures are on that. What picture is that called? I can't remember.
Somebody fishing.
Yeah. Not the vertical fishing one, the archaic one, the three pairs.
Oh, not the, okay, two paintings, but both paintings were of fishing. The man amongst the trees, so there's the Hollow Creek, trees, it's kind of bottom-ish, you know, and there is a man on the other side facing you, and he actually has a pole in his hand, fishing. The painting had been scrubbed. You know, when the paintings get old, they get dirty, you know. People had wood stoves, coal stoves, and the soot got on the painting. And how do you get that soot off? You use soap and water, right? And maybe a pillow. I don't know. But what happens?
Skin on it. It takes the paint surface off.
It takes the surface off. Paint's very soluble underwater. Water's a great solvent. And so the painting had been a little oversweet, okay? And so it's kind of hard to see all those things like a photograph. But what's the time?
We know the time.
We know the time. It's in storage.
Yeah, I mean, pardon?
It is on display.
The horizontal,
The horizontal one?
not the vertical.
Oh.
The vertical one, there's a vertical one, nice one, of the boy fishing on the Hollow Creek. But on the viewer side. We went a horizontal, close to Paris, but yeah, so you know, not everything can be up at all times.
I'll find it in the book.
Thank you.
We love these questions.
Gina has one. I don't know if there's any way to confirm this, but is it possible that John Hafen actually painted Springville in the Salt Lake Temple? And the reason I ask that is because the view from our window is Hollow Creek Canyon, and the shape is very definitive. And there was a time that we were in the Salt Lake Temple, and I looked at the painting on the wall at the Salt Lake Temple, and that was the exact shape that I see out of my window.
My goodness.
That's, yeah.
So did you paint from the temple?
Which room in the temple? The world room? Yeah, I think it's possible. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, probably possible.
We think Hafen painted the garden room, not the world room. I'm sure they participated in the other rooms, but Laura Pratt and J.B. Fairbanks worked on the world room.
A lot of people don't know, but Dan Wageland also was instrumental in the work on the city temple. And he had painted the Manti temple, and then Minerva Kiker painted over his face.
No,
Well, I mean, there's like that.
he painted, Wegland painted the garden room in Manti.
Yeah.
Wegland painted the animals in the Salt Lake Temple.
There's some nice studies I believe Laura has. So it's
So while the art missionaries were in Paris, were they just studying, or were they also producing works of art and selling them locally? Did they ever enter them in competition? competitions in Paris? Do you know anything about
They were studying, but they also went out sketching and painting in nature. And they didn't sell them locally, there was too much competition for that in Paris. But there are a few works that survive from that period. The church museum has one or two of them from that period, and Boulet has one. But they didn't sell any work during that time. And what was the second part of your question?
Did they enter in any of their?
Oh, yeah. Yes, they had, well, Hafen prepared a painting, and it's in the exhibit here, that he wanted to submit for the Salon competition, which they held in Paris every couple of years, and it was a prestigious thing to be accepted by the Salon. There were, that year, Hafen mentioned that there were something like 6,000 applications to the Salon, and they only accepted about 200, I think, of those. And so it was a very prestigious thing to be accepted in the Salon, but none of the art missionaries exhibited there, although Hafen prepared a picture that he hoped to submit, but he never did.
Loris Pratt painted maybe 100 paintings in France. Oil studies, all oil studies, and they're owned by a member of the family in the Holiday area. I've seen them, and in fact, we acquired 2 or 3 from them. So they're Loris Pratts, and so they did paint. Hafen wrote his wife and said, send over the painting of Mill Creek, I think it is. No. Yeah, of the old mill. I want to finish it. Okay, so she mailed the painting from here to Paris. He finished it, sent back, so that she could sell it and make a little money for, the children. So there's a bit of that, but even not much. Most of it we don't have. Loris Pratt is quite a few.
You have one in Paris.
Mm-hmm.
In Springville.
We do. We have really good. It's called the Wriggle. Yeah, he cheated to get that, but okay. Well, anyway, Wriggle was an artist who the Paris boys studied under actually John Hafen, although Hafen knew him because he was just a student at the Academy of Vienna. Wriggle was Gabriel. And very fine. So the boys, even though he was younger than any of our artists, they studied under him for a year. Those that stayed an extra year or 2 in Paris.
Any final, okay, ready?
I'm just curious, did any of the Hafen children?
Virgil.
Yeah.
What's that?
The Hafen children.
His son Virgil was a painter. He actually was in Indiana with him.
No, Virgil.
Virgil.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the kids all went out with him. Everybody's kids went out painting but Virgil is the one who at least pursued it to a certain extent.
J. Leo Hafen did a little, not much. So.
Yeah, his name is photography.
Mostly photography. Was a great photographer and is quite well known in the history of analysts for photography for some new developments that he did. Yeah.
How long did John Hafen's widow survive him? And did she live to see his influence and popularity begin to expand?
Not really. There was a show of Tora Creedy Hafen lived till 19. Okay. She died in West Tennant in the movement. breast cancer, and they, but in 1920, no, I would say there wasn't much interest in John Hafen. There was a big show in 1924 of 65 pieces. I wish we had all those pieces. Yeah, I'm sure there's many that you don't know about. But anyway, so, and then just after John Hafen's death, they held 2 shows here in town, and but they were basically fire sales. Okay, it's very sad at the prices. You know, $5, $6 per painting.
We just have a few minutes left, so I'm gonna ask the final 2 questions. One, for Angela and for Vern. I just wanna ask you to talk a little bit more about what was the process of working on the book and collaborating. And then I would love to just go around to each panelist, and if you had anything else you want to share on Ethan that you haven't been able to share tonight. What's your closing word? But first, Angela, what was the process like?
Sure. Well, we were in 2 different states, but we talked every day. We used Google Drive a lot and Google Sheets as the documents. And he would write some, and I would write some. We would write over each other a little bit. We did a survey together of all the literature that is out there, because he started in 1981. It was harder to find some of this literature out there, so we did a lot of transcribing. I would write a chapter, he would write a chapter, we would edit and review each other's work. It's always a temptation to overwrite. We did a lot of that too. But we had a great time working together.
Angela was the dogged in making sure that everything on newspaper.com was found and transcribed. So I think we found most of the national literature on John Hafen. But what was so much fun was I got to work with him. It's really a nice person. I have 2 wonderful daughters, and but one was an art historian, so that I got to work with this one. The other one's but anyway, so that was great. But Hafen, the letters so personal. Hafen was a good letter writer, and I mean maybe he's not Theo and Vincent Van Gogh, but dear Theo. Well, anyway, so we used the letters. There were periods of time when they were together, they didn't write letters, but they were separated a lot in the later decade. Not because of disaffection, they deeply loved each other. Okay, and I just wish there was a bit of sun back in that day. We would have Hafen with us for another 20 years. You know, I mean, he was very young, very vigorous. He worked every day. He was something that I could never be. A vegetarian. Okay? And so it's interesting. He was into Kellogg's cornflakes, the medicinal at the sanatorium in Albany, and the cornflakes were invented in 1906, and he was a forerunner in their health application. Before we know that all those processed foods are there. Anyway, so he was very health conscious to die so young, and she was she didn't die elderly by any means. She just died in her 10 years after he died. So she was probably 60. But the success, there's something we did that if you don't do it, you cannot be an expert on an artist. We wrote a catalog raisonné. So we have a 500-page catalog raisonné. That means every work by date with all the provenances, the exhibitions, the literature on every painting. Now, we have about 650 to 700 catalogs, and we know we're missing a lot. So I think there's 800 to 900 paintings like Hafen, at least, maybe more. There were times that he was very prolific. These are not counting sun portraits, solar portraits, okay? Never counted. So anyway, but by doing the catalog resume, we deeply understood what he was doing and the directions he was moving in, and all the movement. So it was helpful, essential, really, to the catalog. Okay, well, let's have.
Well,
We've known each other for years. And,
yeah, Werner is so helpful when I was doing my research. I would just say about John Hafen that I felt like I knew him personally because of his letters and other writings that I was able to find. And as much as I appreciate his art, I appreciate him more as a human being. He was passionate about art. He was passionate about mankind. He loved people, and I just think he was a wonderful man, not just a great artist. So I'll say that.
Everybody loved John Hafen. And there's nobody old enough here, 1910. Anybody alive in 1910? No.
Yeah, he was always wanting to do things. If there was an organization that was semi-art related, he was signing up, he wanted to be the president, he would serve in every role available, and sometimes he was the president because people liked him. He was very congenial and kind. And I think the most touching part that we both felt when we were writing the book was about the Springville Art Movement. Just how much he loved the community and he wanted to elevate humanity and grow our appreciation of God's creations and share that with children. He felt like there were so many opportunities for them to have other artistic experiences with music and dance and literature, but art was, the visual arts were lacking in this community. And his, impetus, talking about it, donating, getting people to join the cause was really touching and very encouraging.
He was obviously very interested in anything that was beautiful, lovely, or could report or praiseworthy, and he tried to share that with everyone. And that's why his legacy continues to this day. That's why we're interested in it, and he will continue to influence people for years to come.
Tell me about Muhammad. What did Muhammad say about it? Who couldn't talk? Who couldn't answer? When he found out about their death.
Oh, right, yeah. Oh, right, well, when they found about the death of John Hafen in 1910, the press immediately started following all the artists. And many of them, when they heard that John Hafen had passed, were speechless. But Muhammad Young, and I shared a quote, that he really was able to poignantly talk about what is, the essence of John Hafen, that he lived for his art, that he was a congenial person, everybody loved him, and what he thought was the greatest landscape painter at the time, which just saying a lot, because there's some good landscape painters. Yeah.
We had over 600 pages, 700 pages of documents. So everything got typed out, all the documents from newspapers, through letters, the official documents, in chronological order. And so sometimes we knew a lot about Hafen, because of the letters like. Sometimes maybe 6 months, we don't know anything about Hafen, except then the catalogs are made. and say this. And, you know, so we're trying to get different areas like that would be very helpful. But Hafen had a dear friend named Cyrus Bell. And it takes sometimes 2 or 3 people. And those 2, May Huntington, Lars Andersen, the educator, and they did it mostly through school. This is the Hafen Valley Museum. It's often called Hafen Valley Museum. It was not called the Springville Museum of Art. It's called the Springville High School Art. And this is a very sacred, wonderful thing. Reminds me of John Hafen.
Well, and what a great note to end on. It really is all here because of John Hafen and his belief, our art and his legacy and his ideas. So let's give our incredible panelists another big round of applause.